It began with thunder from the sky. 353 Japanese aircrafts roaring over Pearl Harbor, unleashing devastation that stunned the world. On December 7, 1941, Japan struck what seemed like a perfect blow. Battleships ablaze, aircrafts destroyed, and American morale shattered. The empire's leaders believed they had crippled the Pacific Fleet and cleared the path for swift conquest. But beneath the smoke and wreckage, the seeds of a trap had already been sown. What looked like victory was a strategic miscalculation. This is the story of how an attack that looked like a decisive win quietly became the trap that helped turn the tide against Japan. By late 1941, the Pacific was a theater of tense diplomacy and quiet preparation. Japan had been pressing southward for resources and territory, especially in China and in the Dutch East Indies. It demanded the end of US sanctions, cessation of American aid to China, and permission to secure vital raw materials. But United States stood firm, culminating in the Hull Note, which pressed Japan to withdraw from China and French Indochina. Here, Japan made a critical decision. Rather than backing down, it tried to neutralize the main American threat in the Pacific and move rapidly to seize the resource-rich territories of Southeast Asia. Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, made the whole plan. He believed that a preemptive strike could cripple American naval power long enough for Japan to secure its gains and force a negotiated peace. To Yamamoto and many in the Imperial Japanese Navy, the decisive form of naval warfare remained the fleet action of ships like the battleship, a doctrine influenced by Alfred Thayer Mahan and the idea of a single conclusive battle. They thought that if Japan destroyed American battleships and morale at the same time, the United States might reconsider its regional posture. Thus, on November 26, 1941, Japan sent its attack force toward Hawaii, setting the plan into motion. The group that slipped out to sea did so in secrecy. 6 aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and support vessels sailed a long circuit to avoid detection. The fleet commander for the strike was Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. The strike force launched at 7:48 a.m. Hawaiian time on December 7th, and for 7 hours, Japan carried out coordinated attacks across the Pacific, hitting not only Pearl Harbor but also American and Allied outposts in the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island, and British holdings in Malaya, Singapore, and Hong Kong. The attack on Pearl Harbor came in 2 waves, with a total of 353 fighters, level and dive bombers, and torpedo planes. They flew from 6 carriers and focused on the battleships anchored at Ford Island and the harbor's moorings. The results were dramatic. Of 8 battleships present, all were damaged and 4 were sunk, including the notorious destruction of USS Arizona. More than 180 American aircraft were destroyed. 2,403 Americans got killed and 1,178 were wounded. Japanese losses were relatively light by comparison: 29 aircraft, 5 midget submarines, and 130 personnel. But the important strategic targets were left untouched. The 3 American aircraft carriers that would prove decisive in the coming months were not in port. They were at sea on missions and escaped the blow. Equally crucial were the oil storage facilities, naval repair yards, submarine base, and the island's old headquarters buildings. All these installations were largely spared, but these omissions would prove to be a strategic gift. Japan had also coordinated a broader campaign. Within hours of the Pearl Strike, Japanese forces struck the Philippines and British territories. Striking from multiple directions, Japan believed that shock and speed would give them the window to consolidate control over Southeast Asia, cut off Allied supply lines, and force a political settlement favorable to Tokyo. Now the attack had immediate political and diplomatic consequences. In Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt took the nation's outrage and channeled it into his famous "A Date Which Will Live in Infamy" address. Congress declared war on Japan less than an hour after the speech. Within a few days, the conflict widened. Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, and the US responded in kind. Britain, already at war with Germany and Italy, declared war on Japan within hours of the attacks on Malaya, Singapore, and Hong Kong. The immediate military result for Japan seemed positive. The US Pacific Fleet was badly bloodied. Moreover, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill was deeply shaken by the sinking of the British capital ships Prince of Wales and Repulse off the coast of Malaya, a blow that made it clear to the Allies that Japan now held a dangerous naval advantage across the Indian Ocean and Pacific. From the Japanese tactical perspective, the attack accomplished several key objectives. It destroyed or damaged a concentration of US battleships, which at the time were still seen as the backbone and prestige symbols of naval power. Those ships represented the most visible and immediate threat to Japan's planned southward expansion. So it was thought that destroying battleships would reduce US to project power across the Pacific, and would buy time for Japan to secure the Dutch East Indies and other territories for oil and raw materials. The strike also fit the Imperial Navy's doctrine of seeking a crushing, decisive result. By targeting battleships and inflicting a stunning blow on American naval prestige, Japanese commanders hoped to sap American morale and force a political compromise. Temporarily neutralizing the Pacific Fleet would allow Japan to consolidate gains and build a naval edge before US shipbuilding programs, like those advanced under the 1940 Vinson-Walsh Act, could restore American superiority. Now, a close reading of what Japan left untouched shows why that apparent perfection was deceptive. Japan initially focused on battleships because, according to Alfred Thayer Mahan's naval doctrine, they were considered the crown jewels of maritime power. However, the nature of naval warfare was evolving rapidly. Aircraft carriers, submarines, and robust logistical support were emerging as the true power players in long-range maritime conflict. Fortunately for the United States, its three Pacific-based carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, were away from Pearl Harbor during the attack. Their survival later formed the core of America's counteroffensive. Second, Japan neglected the anchors of naval endurance, repair facilities, and fuel depots. The oil storage tanks and repair yards at Pearl Harbor were not primary targets in the attack plan, and their survival mattered more to wartime operations than any sunk battleship. With those facilities intact, the US could repair ships, keep them fueled, and maintain the flow of operations across the Pacific. Third, Japan underestimated American industrial capacity and will. They assumed that a destabilizing blow would crush American morale and make political leaders seek compromise. Instead, it rallied the nation into a determined industrial and military mobilization. Shipbuilding accelerated rapidly, carriers and aircraft multiplied, and long-term American production power and logistics became the decisive counterweight Japan had hoped to outrun. Many historians point to Midway in June 1942 as the critical point where Japan realized the trap had snapped shut. The survival of American carriers and repair capacity allowed the US to mount offensive operations sooner than Japan expected. The Doolittle raid in April 1942, launched from US carriers, showed Japan that its home islands were within reach and that American morale and reach had not been broken. That raid also forced the IJN and Imperial Army to divert resources to defend the home islands and the China coast, stretching Japanese logistics. Submarine warfare added an economic dimension to the trap. American submarines, though still learning, began to strangle Japan's shipping lanes and its flow of essential oil and raw materials. The effect on Japan's economy and military sustainment was catastrophic and cumulative. Cryptanalysis was the other decisive element. Signals intelligence, based partly at Pearl Harbor's facilities, allowed the US Navy to read Japanese moves more effectively. At Midway, American codebreakers, naval intelligence, and carrier task forces combined to ambush Nagumo's fleet, sinking 4 Japanese carriers and reversing the balance of naval air power in the Pacific. Finally, Admiral Chuichi Hara's rueful summation, "We won a great tactical victory at Pearl Harbor and thereby lost the war," revealed that the attack did not secure the strategic conditions Japan needed. It bought time, but not the kind that mattered. It wrenched open a war against a nation with far greater industrial reserves, a resilient population, and the capacity to adapt to new forms of naval warfare centered on air power and submarines. The attack reshaped societies as well as strategies. In Hawaii and on the West Coast, the immediate aftermath featured fear and punitive measures. Hundreds of Japanese-American leaders in Hawaii were rounded up and sent to secure camps. Within months, more than 110,000 Japanese Americans from the mainland were forced into internment camps. In Hawaii, where Japanese Americans made up a large portion of the population, fewer were interned, but the social rupture was still real. Now, what are your thoughts about this video? Share with us in the comments section below. Also, if you like this video, share it with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more interesting content.